The story starts with an expensive car that was passing through the mountains. It had a man named Henry, who was very old, and a young and beautiful girl named Elizabeth, who was wearing a wedding dress. She was dreaming of having a beautiful life with her husband, away from all the difficulties of her life. After this, we see a magnificent house, which was made in the middle of the mountains. Upon entering the house, they meet the housekeeper, Claire, and her husband. And when she met a boy named Oliver, she came to know that Oliver was blind. Seeing such a beautiful house, there was no place for Elizabeth's happiness. Then at night, they had a delicious meal and spent some loving moments together. The next morning, Henry showed Elizabeth the whole house, where there were priceless paintings everywhere. Then he saw that all the doors had biometric locks. Then Elizabeth's eyes fell on a white door, and she asked Henry, "What is here?" So Henry asked her not to go to this room even after forgetting it. Elizabeth replied, "I can't go even if I want to. As it is, all the doors open with your fingerprints." To which Henry replied, "There is no need to get angry. Your fingerprints will also open." The next morning, Henry had to go out for some work. Elizabeth took a bath in the pool, wore all kinds of clothes and jewelry, and passed the time. Then at night, she saw Claire and Oliver going out of the house. She was not able to sleep afterwards. So she started roaming around the house alone, and as soon as she reached in front of that white door, she could not stop herself from going inside. When she opened the door, she saw that it was a scientific lab. Elizabeth pressed a button, and suddenly a glass capsule came in front of her. It had a young girl in it, and there was a tube in her mouth. Elizabeth saw that this girl looked exactly like her. She got so scared that she ran away from there. But because of this, she hit a table and a glass got stuck in her finger. The next morning, Henry came back and started playing the piano for Elizabeth. But soon she saw that Elizabeth was lost in her own thoughts. When Henry asked about her finger injury, Claire lied. But Henry already knew that Elizabeth was lying. Then at night, Elizabeth pretended to sleep. And as soon as Henry woke up to go to that secret room, she also started following him quietly. But all of a sudden, Henry came out of the darkness and started getting angry at Elizabeth. Elizabeth said in her defense that she did not see anything wrong, but Henry did not listen to her. When he ran to kill Elizabeth, she tried to run away, but all the doors were locked. Then all of a sudden, Henry pulled her leg and finished her with a knife. After this, we see that Henry, Claire, and Oliver together dug and buried Elizabeth's body. Exactly 6 weeks after this, Henry married a new clone of Elizabeth and brought her home. Once again, the same thing happened, and Henry forbade her to go to the secret room. Elizabeth agreed, and both started living happily together. Claire was watching them in the dark. Later, Elizabeth could not sleep, so she came out and saw Claire in the kitchen. They started talking, and Elizabeth started asking her different questions. Claire tried to warn Elizabeth from Henry, but then Henry came there and took her back to the bedroom. The next morning, when Henry left for some work, Elizabeth was roaming around the house. She called out to Claire and Oliver, but there was no one there. Then she again wore different clothes and jewelry like before. Then she went back to Henry, but she could not stop herself again and went to the secret room. After some time, she also came out screaming and running. The next morning, Henry returned and saw that Elizabeth was very scared. He understood that Elizabeth did not listen to him again. Suddenly, he attacked Elizabeth and tried to strangle her. But Elizabeth pushed him and ran away. He picked up the knife from the kitchen and came there with Henry's chloroform cloth. Then he started playing the piano to distract Elizabeth. Now he slowly moved towards her and suddenly placed a chloroform cloth on her face. Then Elizabeth pretended to be unconscious and suddenly stabbed Henry in the stomach. Henry fell there due to the wound, and soon Elizabeth also fainted. Later, when her eyes opened, she was covered with blood, and Henry was dead. Now Elizabeth immediately cleaned the blood from the floor and cleaned the kitchen. Then she tied Henry's body in a cloth and hid it in the lift and burned her bloody clothes. After this, she called the emergency, but she didn't know where she was. But seeing Elizabeth alive, Claire and Oliver were in shock. Claire understood that Elizabeth being alive means Henry is dead. Suddenly, she got a heart attack in the kitchen. She immediately called the ambulance, and the ambulance took her to the hospital. Now Elizabeth was also in a hurry to run away from home, but Oliver stopped her and said that he knows that Henry is dead. Elizabeth said in fear that I did not do this on purpose. I had to kill myself to save my life. On which Oliver said that he also did not like Henry. That's why he will help him in burying the body. Then Elizabeth asked him, "Who am I?" Then Oliver told him that Henry had made 6 clones of his wife, Elizabeth, and she is Elizabeth number 5. Hearing this, Elizabeth lost her mind, and she could not understand anything. Oliver asked her to take all the money and run away from here. Then Elizabeth was packing her things in her room. Then Oliver came there with Claire's diary. He asked Elizabeth to read the diary, and then he closed the door outside and left. Elizabeth could not understand anything, and she started asking him to open the door again and again. Then Elizabeth got sad and started reading Claire's diary. Then she came to know that Claire was an excellent genetic scientist, and Henry had called Claire to work with him. But when she came to know what she had to do, her blood dried up. Henry told her that his wife Elizabeth died of a lethal disease while giving birth to Oliver. This shocked Henry so much that he took out Elizabeth's genes and made 6 clones of her. But unfortunately, the same disease cells were growing in all of them. Then Henry bought the capsules and put the clones in it. When Claire came there, only 4 clones were left. Now, Claire did a lot of research on those genes for a long time. Here, Henry tried to fill the music and other memories in these clones so that they can be made memorable. At the same time, Claire modified the genes and killed the disease genes. Then Henry took out the first clone, but he had no experience of real life, and because of this, a lot of weird things were going on in his mind. Then one day, she ran out of the house, worried about all this, but on the way, the police saw her and brought her back home. Then Henry told the police that Elizabeth's mental condition was not good, and the police left her there. At that time, 5th Elizabeth was reading all this in her diary. That's when Oliver suddenly came with food. Seeing her, Elizabeth jumped on her and asked for a coat to open the door. Oliver gave her the coat, and she went out. And Oliver reached the lab. After a while, when Elizabeth reached the lab, so he saw that Oliver was working on the 6th Elizabeth. He asked the 5th Elizabeth to hold the 6th Elizabeth's head. When Elizabeth did this, Oliver suddenly gave her an injection and made her unconscious. Elizabeth saw a dream in a state of unconsciousness, where she saw the lives of all her clones. Later, when she opened her eyes, she was tied to the bed with chains. Now, exhausted, she started reading Claire's diary again. She read that Claire's research was going on, but the first clone died in a week. However, Claire had killed the disease genes. That's why she didn't understand why this happened. Now, Henry was deeply shocked, as he had dedicated many years of his life to this research. After this, Henry and Claire came close to each other. Then Oliver came to Elizabeth's room and asked if Claire had written anything about him. Elizabeth told him that after the death of the 3rd clone, the affair of Henry and Claire had started. Then Oliver told her that she used to like Elizabeth a lot when she was a child, because she had never seen such a beautiful girl. Then we come to know that Oliver was not blind from the beginning. One night, Oliver saw Henry and Elizabeth kissing, and then Henry blinded Oliver in anger. After telling this, Oliver went out. Then Elizabeth read in the diary that Claire broke off the relationship with Henry because it was not her cup of tea to compete with Elizabeth's cloners. Later, when Claire checked the records, she found out that the real Elizabeth had not given birth to any child. Then it is revealed that Oliver was not Henry's son, but a young clone of Henry. The next morning, when the 5th Elizabeth opened her eyes, Oliver put a scythe around her neck and asked, "What did Claire write about him in her diary?" Elizabeth said, according to Claire, "You are Henry's clone." But this was not true, because Henry had shown Claire a birth certificate. This means that Oliver is not a clone of Henry. Then Elizabeth asked Oliver if he loves her. Then he called Oliver to himself. Oliver could not stop himself and came close to Elizabeth. But then Elizabeth dropped him on the ground and put a scissor on his neck. He asked Oliver for the key to the lock and the code of the door. Then suddenly the 6th Elizabeth reached there with a gun in her hand. Oliver told the new Elizabeth that the 5th Elizabeth is fake and we have to kill her. But the 5th Elizabeth said that this is not true. Both of them have been forcibly imprisoned here. But the 6th Elizabeth was ready to shoot. The 5th Elizabeth immediately put Oliver in front of her. And as soon as the 6th Elizabeth fired, she shot Oliver directly, which killed him on the spot. But this also injured the 5th Elizabeth. Then she saw the opportunity and ran away, and the 6th Elizabeth started crying for Oliver. On the other hand, number 5's mind was filled with the memories of old Elizabeth's life. Suddenly, she heard the sound of a bullet, and we see that 6th Elizabeth shot 5th Elizabeth. In her last moments, number 5 saw her face coming closer to her. The next morning, 6th Elizabeth read Claire's diary. According to him, Henry had transferred all his property to Claire so that he could continue his research. Then the truth came out that the real Elizabeth was not born at the time of birth, but was accidentally killed by Henry. After killing her, Henry made her clones. But the truth was that she still enjoyed killing Elizabeth. Henry knew that this clonus is not the real Elizabeth. That's why after killing her, he believed that she is the real one. After reading all this, 6th Elizabeth saw that Claire has returned. They met, and Elizabeth left everything for Claire because she didn't want any trouble for herself. Finally, Elizabeth set out on her way to start a new life.